The sun was setting over Melbourne, painting the sky with a mix of orange and purple. The streets were beginning to empty, and the city was preparing for a quiet night. Madison, with her disheveled blonde hair and a tired expression, drove down the quiet street, eager to get home and rest. The day had been long and exhausting, and she longed for some peace in her small apartment in Fitzroy. But fate had other plans. As Madison made a gentle turn, a figure suddenly appeared in the road, a dark, indistinct blur of movement. Her reaction was instinctive, a cry of surprise. The steering wheel jerked violently, and then, the impact. Madison's world turned into a whirlwind of metal and glass, and everything around her became a confusing mess of deafening sounds and flashing lights. The car skidded uncontrollably, crashing into a streetlight with a loud crash. Inside the car, Madison was paralyzed, her senses struggling to recover from the shock. The nightmare was palpable, blood was streaming down her face and the pain was intense, but consciousness was fading rapidly. The last thing she saw was the darkness swallowing the city around her and the sound of distant sirens growing fainter. When Madison finally woke up, she found herself in a strange place. The environment around her was opaque and hazy, with a feeling of being somewhere between worlds, a dark limbo. The sensation of being in a hazy dream was overwhelming. She tried to move, but felt an inexplicable weight, as if she were enveloped in thick mist. Murmuring voices filled the space, speaking in a language she didn't understand. Suddenly, a light began to pierce the darkness, revealing the forms of hooded figures, their silhouettes imposing and mystical. They were engaged in an ancient ritual, chanting with an old power. Madison tried to rise, but an invisible force kept her in place. The sensation of being watched and judged was oppressive. One of the figures, the tallest with a piercing gaze, approached Madison. She held an ancient object, a kind of amulet, that glowed with a supernatural light. The amulet seemed to pulse with mystical energy, and her expression was grave and full of sinister purpose. Without any explanation, the figure began to chant more loudly, and the amulet started to shine intensely. Madison felt a wave of energy coursing through her body, as if every cell were being rewritten. The pain of her death seemed to vanish, replaced by a strange and new sensation. Then, the world began to spin again. In an instant, she was back to full consciousness, but something had changed. The city of Melbourne, which once felt familiar and comforting, now seemed strange and threatening. Madison was back to life, but the cost was high. She rose from the cold ground, looking around with a sense of alienation. The streets of Melbourne now seemed distant and alien, as if a layer of mist were the only veil between reality and something darker and deeper. Madison's life would never be the same. What had seemed like a mundane accident had turned into something much more sinister and terrifying. The voices surrounding her were no longer just distant echoes, they were part of the new reality she had to face. What awaited her from that moment on was a journey that would lead her to the heart of darkness and reveal secrets that should have remained buried. Madison walked through the streets of Melbourne with hesitant steps, her mind still processing the chaos she had experienced. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and a light drizzle began to fall, making the city even darker and more unsettling. The once vibrant city now seemed desolate, as if an invisible shadow hung over it. Every sound, from the distant rumble of an engine to the whisper of leaves in the wind, felt amplified and threatening. When Madison finally reached her apartment, the sense of strangeness did not leave her. The lights flickered irregularly, and a chill pervaded the atmosphere. She tried to find some normalcy in her routine, but the weight of her new reality was undeniably present. During the night, Madison was awakened by a disturbing dream. Images of an ancient ceremony, hooded figures, and the glow of the amulet haunted her. She woke up sweating and gasping, and the feeling that something was wrong grew stronger with every passing minute. The next morning, Madison received an unexpected visitor. At her apartment door stood a man with a weathered appearance, an imposing presence, and deep, enigmatic eyes. He introduced himself as the Guardian. His attire was traditional, adorned with tribal symbols, and his voice had a deep, resonant tone. "You have been chosen," he said, his voice echoing as if it came from a distant place. "You have been brought back to fulfill a destiny beyond human understanding." Madison tried to grasp his words, but confusion was overwhelming. The Guardian invited her to accompany him to a special place, something she felt she could not refuse. Desperate to understand what was happening, Madison agreed. They headed to a more remote part of the city, an area where urbanization gave way to dense, ancient forests. The Guardian led her along a hidden path, which seemed to lead to the heart of a grove. The feeling of being guided into the unknown was palpable, and the atmosphere around them felt almost electrically charged with tension. When they arrived at an ancient stone circle, Madison was struck by the place. The stones were covered in moss and seemed to have been placed there millennia ago. The circle was imbued with an aura of ancient power, and the Guardian began chanting in an old language, his words flowing like part of a primordial melody. Around the circle, tribe members appeared, dressed in traditional garb and holding ceremonial instruments. They were engaged in a slow, hypnotic dance that seemed to invoke a supernatural energy. The Guardian explained that Madison had been resurrected for a greater purpose, involving an ancient tribal war that was now unfolding in the shadows of Melbourne. As the ritual continued, Madison felt a sense of transformation within herself. An invisible force seemed to be shaping her destiny, and her connection to the tribe's ancestral past grew stronger. The visions from the dream became clearer, and she began to understand that she was at the center of a conflict that transcended time and space. The Guardian then revealed that Melbourne was immersed in a secret struggle between forces seeking to control the ancient power guarded by the tribe. This struggle was about to intensify, and Madison, now part of this dark plot, had a crucial role to play. Her resurrection was not an accident but an essential piece of a puzzle that was slowly unfolding. The ceremony ended, and Madison was left alone to reflect on her new role. The grove was silent now, and the city seemed farther away than ever. The sense of belonging to that ancient tradition was overwhelming, and she knew that the battle between the forces of darkness and light was just beginning. Madison had been brought back for something much greater than she could have ever imagined, and her true journey was about to begin. As the new week began, Madison tried to resume her normal life, but Melbourne seemed to have changed. The chaos of her accident and the revelation of the ritual left her with a constant feeling of unease. The streets and avenues, once familiar, now seemed strange, as if the city had transformed into a dark and unpredictable maze. The shadows appeared to stretch longer than usual, and the constant drizzle added to the atmosphere of mystery and desolation. Madison watched the behavior of the people around her, noticing that they seemed restless and distressed, as if trying to escape something they couldn't see or understand. The feeling of being watched was constant, and people's eyes seemed to follow her movements, filled with unsettling curiosity. One day, while walking through the city center, Madison noticed something disturbing. The shop windows and billboards, usually full of ads and promotions, now displayed distorted images and cryptic messages. One billboard, in particular, caught her eye: "The light always follows the shadows." The words were written in a Gothic style, evoking a sense of urgency and danger. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Madison decided to visit a close friend, Sarah, who worked in an old bookstore in the Carlton neighborhood. The store, with its shelves full of rare and ancient books, had a cozy atmosphere that provided a welcome contrast to the oppressive mood of the city. However, even there, the sense of strangeness did not fade. During their conversation, Sarah mentioned a recent increase in inexplicable events and reports of mysterious figures sighted at night. The city seemed to be turning into a place of mystery and disorder, with people reporting disturbing dreams and inexplicable feelings of panic. Madison tried to hide her concern, but the feeling that something was seriously wrong was undeniable. She decided to investigate on her own. Using information from Sarah, she began exploring the less frequented areas of the city, where the streets were darker and the buildings older. During one of these nighttime explorations, Madison came across an old, abandoned theater known as the Midnight Theater. The place had been closed for decades, but its doors were slightly ajar, as if inviting her inside. The theater's facade was covered in graffiti and signs of decay, and the environment exuded an aura of abandonment and mystery. Madison entered cautiously, her flashlight casting uncertain beams of light on the smoky walls and dust-covered seats. The theater was completely silent, but there was something unsettling in the air, a sense that the place was filled with dark memories. As she explored the interior, she found a stage covered with old curtains and rusted lighting equipment. The feeling of being watched intensified as she walked through the dark corridors and hidden spaces. Suddenly, a vision from the past seemed to unfold before her. Images of old performances and scenes of panic filled the stage, as if the theater were trying to tell a forgotten story. Madison felt a presence that was almost tangible, as if the theater were a portal to something far darker than mere past events. The experience at the theater left Madison with an unsettling feeling, a connection to something deep and dark that was unfolding in the city. The clues she found seemed to link current events to an unknown force manipulating Melbourne from the shadows. When she left the theater, the sky had completely darkened, and the city was shrouded in thick fog. The streets now seemed like endless mazes, and the sense of dread was almost overwhelming. The city was turning into an invisible battlefield, and Madison felt she was at the center of something much more sinister than she could have imagined. With each passing day, the line between reality and the supernatural seemed to blur, and Madison knew her search for answers was only beginning. Melbourne had transformed into a place of mystery and terror, and she was about to uncover the true horror lurking beneath the city's surface. Madison woke up the next morning with a sense of foreboding. The shadows in the city seemed more intense, and an impression that something was about to happen hung over her. The Guardian had promised that she would need to familiarize herself with the tribe and their ancient culture, and the urgency of this mission was palpable. She found the Guardian waiting for her at the entrance of an old park, hidden deep within Melbourne. It was a place she had never noticed before, despite her neighborhood being relatively central. The trees were tall and dense, their leaves forming a canopy that blocked out the sunlight, creating a dark and mysterious environment. The Guardian led Madison along a winding path that seemed to snake through the foliage. The sound of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind were gradually replaced by a deep, reverent silence. They arrived at a clearing where Madison was amazed to see a circle of ancient stones arranged in a meticulously organized pattern. The stones were covered in Aboriginal symbols and runes that seemed to pulse with mystical energy. Around the circle, the tribe was gathered for a ritual. The tribe members, dressed in traditional clothing and ceremonial adornments, were engaged in a dance that combined fluid, rhythmic movements with resonant, rhythmic steps. The atmosphere was charged with an ancestral energy that seemed alive and in motion. The smell of burning herbs and the sound of drums and rattles filled the air. The Guardian introduced Madison to the tribe's leaders, each adorned with regalia indicating their status and role within the community. There was an elderly woman, known as the Elder, whose features were marked by deep wisdom and an aura of power. Next to her was the shaman, a man with intense eyes and an almost supernatural presence. The elder looked at Madison with a mix of curiosity and severity. "You were brought back for a reason." The war unfolding now is not just ours but affects all who inhabit this land. As the ceremony continued, Madison watched both fascinated and terrified. The tribe was performing a series of rituals intended to summon and control the forces disturbing the city. They used amulets and ancient objects, and the ceremony seemed to create a direct connection with the spiritual world. The shaman began to speak in an ancient language, his chants resonating with a deep and unsettling power. He poured a potion over the stones of the circle, and an ethereal mist began to form, taking the shape of images depicting ancient battles and conflicts between supernatural forces. The visions showed a struggle between the tribe and malevolent entities seeking to dominate Melbourne. Madison was called to the center of the circle and placed under a structure of branches and leaves, which seemed to serve as an ancient altar. The tribe members formed a circle around her, chanting words of protection and invocation. The shaman made a ritualistic gesture with a staff adorned with feathers and mystical symbols, and Madison felt a wave of energy coursing through her body. The sensation was both distressing and invigorating. The runes on the stones began to glow, and Madison saw images from her own dreams materializing, visions of mysterious figures and dark events that haunted her. It was as if the line between the real and the spiritual was dissolving, and she was at the epicenter of a force that transcended human understanding. The ritual revealed to Madison the depth of the connection between the tribe and the forces disturbing Melbourne. The city was not merely a battlefield for invisible forces but a place where ancient energies and ancestral conflicts still unfolded. The tribe was in a constant struggle to protect the city and maintain the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. As the ritual concluded, the tribe dispersed, and silence fell over the circle of stones. Madison was exhausted, but the experience had given her a clearer understanding of her role. The sense of belonging and connection to the past was intense, and she knew her journey was just beginning. The stone circle now seemed to be a landmark in her quest for answers. What had once been an opaque mystery was beginning to reveal itself, and Madison was at the center of a story unfolding between shadows and light. The feeling that something was deeply wrong in Melbourne only grew stronger for Madison. The images of the ritual and the secrets revealed by the tribe had left her with a mix of fear and determination. The city, which once seemed like an ordinary place, was now filled with mysteries and secrets that needed to be unraveled. With the city shrouded in a fog of uncertainties and strange apparitions, Madison began to delve into local urban legends. She visited old libraries and historical archives, searching for any clue that could connect the current events with the city's hidden past. During her research, Madison came across a particularly disturbing legend about an ancient cult that had operated in Melbourne in the late 19th century. According to the legend, the cult had sought a dark power and was responsible for a series of horrific events that culminated in a massacre of innocents. This cult was known as the Children of Darkness, and its members believed they could summon a malevolent entity to dominate the city. The legend mentioned a specific location where the cult had performed its rituals, an old mansion, now abandoned, located on the outskirts of the city. Madison decided that this mansion might hold the key to understanding what was happening. The mansion was situated in a forgotten and deteriorated area of Melbourne, surrounded by a wild garden and a rusty iron fence. The building, an imposing Victorian structure, was in a state of complete neglect, with broken windows and rusty doors. There was a sense of desolation and a dangerous aura emanating from the place, as if it harbored dark and ancient secrets. Madison entered cautiously, her flashlight casting uncertain beams of light over the dusty interior. The smell of mold and dust was intense, and the environment was filled with furniture covered in dusty sheets. The floor creaked under her feet, and the feeling of being watched grew with each step. She began to explore the various rooms of the mansion, each telling a story of decay and abandonment. In one room, she found an old library filled with dusty books and yellowed manuscripts. Among them, she discovered an old diary that seemed to have been written by a member of the cult. The diary was filled with detailed rituals and notes about summoning malevolent entities. Reading through the pages revealed that the cult had attempted to open a portal to another dimension, hoping to bring power and control to Melbourne. However, their rituals had caused a rift in the fabric of reality, unleashing forces that were now threatening the city. The connection to the current events became clear. The cult had left behind a legacy of terror that was now remanifesting. As Madison continued her search, she heard a strange noise coming from the upper floor. The sound was like a series of heavy footsteps, followed by a low, incomprehensible whisper. With her heart racing, she climbed the creaking stairs, moving carefully to avoid making noise. On the second floor, she found a hidden room behind a false wall. The room was lit by candles and covered with strange symbols drawn on the floor. In the center was an ancient altar, similar to what she had seen in the tribe's ritual. On the altar were various ritualistic items, including amulets and bottles with disturbing colored liquids. As Madison approached the altar, an intense coldness filled the room. The shadows around seemed to move, and a threatening presence began to manifest. She heard a whispering voice that seemed to come from all directions at once. The feeling of dread was almost unbearable, and Madison had to fight not to succumb to the terror. She managed to take a photo of the items on the altar and the symbols on the floor before feeling a strong presence behind her. Turning quickly, she saw a hooded figure with an aura of pure malice. The figure seemed to have been summoned by the ancient rituals, a manifestation of a force trying to protect the mansion's secret. Madison ran toward the exit, her heart pounding and the sensation of being chased overwhelming her. The atmosphere in the mansion seemed to have shifted, with the shadows becoming more oppressive and the environment more threatening. She managed to escape the mansion and made her way back to her apartment, with the images of what she had seen etched in her mind. Analyzing the photos and the items she had found, Madison realized that the connection between the ancient cult and the current events was deeper than she had imagined. The city was being tormented by an ancient and powerful force, and Madison was now at the center of a struggle that transcended time and reality. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. The nights in Melbourne were becoming increasingly unsettling for Madison. After her exploration of the mansion and the revelation about the Children of Darkness cult, the city seemed to be turning into a stage for vivid and terrifying nightmares. She felt as if the lines between reality and the supernatural were dissolving. The Fitzroy neighborhood, where Madison lived, was particularly affected. The streets, usually lively and welcoming, were now shrouded in an eerie silence. The atmosphere seemed charged with a palpable tension, as if something dark was lurking. Madison noticed that the neighbors were becoming more reclusive, with many keeping their windows closed and lights off, as if trying to shield themselves from some invisible threat. One night, as Madison tried to sleep, she was awakened by a noise coming from the hallway. It was the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps followed by a low, incomprehensible whisper. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the sound seemed real and imminent. She got out of bed, her heart racing, and went to the bedroom door to check what was happening. In the hallway, the atmosphere was thick with an oppressive chill. Madison turned on the light, and for a moment, the noise stopped. But when she looked out the window, she saw something that left her paralyzed. A dark figure was moving through the streets, with a hood concealing its face. The figure seemed to be following a specific path, as if searching for something or someone. Determined to understand what was happening, Madison followed the figure, keeping a safe distance. She trailed it through the deserted streets until they reached an old, abandoned warehouse at the end of an alley. The warehouse was enveloped in deep darkness, and the environment felt saturated with a sinister energy. Madison watched through a broken window as the dark figure entered the warehouse. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and the need for answers drove her to go inside. The interior of the warehouse was cluttered with boxes and debris, and the atmosphere was immersed in a thick mist. As Madison moved through the space, she felt an oppressive presence and a growing sense of dread. The whispering voice she had heard earlier was now clearer, echoing in her head with incomprehensible words. The air was cold and dense, and the feeling of being watched increased with each step. In the center of the warehouse, Madison found a circle drawn on the floor, similar to what she had seen in the mansion and the tribe's ritual. Inside the circle were several ritualistic objects, candles, amulets, and ancient symbols. It was clear that someone had been performing rituals in this place, and the atmosphere was charged with a disturbing energy. As Madison investigated the items in the circle, she felt a cold hand touch her shoulder. She turned quickly to find the dark figure, now revealed as an almost ethereal entity with eyes glowing with a supernatural light. The entity's presence was intense and frightening, and Madison felt a wave of terror that nearly made her faint. The entity began to murmur words in an ancient language, and Madison realized she was in the middle of a ritual attempting to open a portal to another dimension. The figure seemed to be manipulating the energies around it, and the sense of danger was palpable. Madison knew she needed to leave the warehouse before it was too late. As she tried to move away, Madison heard footsteps approaching. Other figures, hooded and surrounded by an aura of malice, were entering the warehouse, joining the ritual. The situation was becoming increasingly chaotic, and Madison needed to escape before she was discovered. She managed to leave the warehouse and return to her apartment, her heart racing. The city was now immersed in a climate of terror, with paranormal events and sinister rituals creating a constant sense of danger. Madison knew she was getting closer to uncovering the truth behind the nightmares haunting Melbourne and the deep connection to the Children of Darkness cult. In the days that followed, Madison felt the pressure mounting. More and more, the city seemed wrapped in a web of mystery and terror. The abandoned warehouse and the sinister rituals had left her with a burning desire to thoroughly understand the secrets Melbourne was hiding. While investigating the notes about the Children of Darkness cult, Madison came across a reference to an ancient map that, according to legend, had the power to reveal the locations of rituals and mystical energy points in the city. The map had been lost for a long time, and no one knew exactly where to find it, but descriptions suggested it was hidden in a place that was both historical and symbolic for the city. The search led Madison to explore some of Melbourne's oldest landmarks. She visited the Melbourne Museum, the State Library, and several historic buildings, looking for any clue that might indicate the whereabouts of the map. With each visit, she felt an increasing sense that she was getting closer to something significant. Finally, during a visit to a small art gallery located in the Fitzroy neighborhood, Madison found something intriguing. Among the local art exhibitions, there was a section dedicated to historical artifacts and old documents. In a corner of the gallery, a dusty old painting was hung, depicting a detailed representation of the city in the 19th century. The painting was a panoramic view of Melbourne, with various marks and enigmatic symbols. Madison noticed something peculiar in the painting, a series of symbols and marks that seemed similar to the ritualistic symbols she had found in the rituals and on the stone circle. The artwork also featured a specific point in the city marked with a red cross and a circle. Determined to investigate, Madison spoke with the gallery curator, an elderly and knowledgeable man named Mr. Abernathy. He explained that the painting was by a local artist who had been a renowned historian and occultist. The artist had been obsessed with Melbourne's hidden history and had apparently left clues about hidden places of interest in his works. Mr. Abernathy provided Madison with some additional information about the artist and his work. Among the gallery's documents, there was an old correspondence mentioning a hidden archive related to the lost map. The correspondence indicated that the archive was hidden in a significant place for the artist, in an old building that had once been a center for esoteric study and research. Madison followed the lead and located the mentioned building, an old study house situated in a remote neighborhood, now in a state of disrepair. The building appeared abandoned, with broken windows and rusty doors. There was something mysterious and enigmatic about the place, as if it had been left to decay. Inside the house, Madison found a dusty office, with shelves filled with old books and documents. The atmosphere was heavy with the smell of mold and years of dust. In the corner of the room, behind a bookcase, Madison discovered a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside the compartment, she found an ancient scroll carefully preserved, the lost map. The map was adorned with ancient symbols and details of specific locations in Melbourne. Some areas were marked with symbols similar to those found in the rituals, and other points were identified as energy portals and power centers. It was clear that the map held crucial importance in understanding the supernatural events affecting the city. Madison studied the map closely, and her discoveries began to make sense. The map indicated a network of locations in Melbourne connected by hidden and powerful energy. Each of these places was associated with a different aspect of the Children of Darkness cult and the ongoing rituals. With the map in hand, Madison felt she had finally found a key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Melbourne. She knew that to protect the city and confront the malevolent forces threatening it, she needed to follow the clues and explore the locations identified on the map. The revelation of the map was not just a crucial step in solving the enigmas but also a call to action to confront the unfolding terror. With the lost map in hand, Madison felt both energized and apprehensive. The key to unraveling Melbourne's enigma was now before her, and the points marked on the map promised to reveal more about the dark rituals troubling the city. Determined to follow the clues, Madison began her journey to the identified locations. The first place she visited was an old cemetery in the Street Kilda suburb. On the map, the cemetery was marked with a symbol indicating a summoning point. Upon arrival, Madison noticed that the cemetery was in a state of disrepair, with broken tombstones and graves overgrown with wild vegetation. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of desolation and mystery. As she explored the cemetery, Madison came across an especially ancient tombstone covered in esoteric symbols similar to those she had seen on the map and in other rituals. The tombstone seemed to point to a specific location within the cemetery, a remote area surrounded by trees. When she dug at the indicated spot, Madison discovered an old chest buried underground, filled with documents and artifacts that appeared to belong to the Children of Darkness. Among the items was a ritual book with detailed descriptions of ceremonies intended to summon malevolent entities. The documents revealed a long-term conspiracy to subvert the city and create a domain of darkness through complex rituals spread across Melbourne. The sense of urgency grew as Madison realized that the city was being systematically prepared for a catastrophic event. The next stop was an old library in the heart of Melbourne. On the map, the library was marked as a hidden power center. Madison arrived at the location, carrying the weight of the cemetery documents in her hands. The library was silent, with shelves of ancient books that seemed to tell stories from past eras. The atmosphere was mysterious, laden with an air of ancient wisdom. As she researched in the library's oldest sections, Madison found a secret file hidden behind a movable bookshelf. The file contained detailed records of secret meetings held by the Children of Darkness over the years. The records described meetings known as Sabbaths, hidden ceremonies occurring on specific dates to channel and reinforce the power of summoned entities. The descriptions of the Sabbaths were disturbing. They involved a group of cult members gathering in symbolic and secret locations, performing complex and elaborate rituals to ensure the continuation of the dark forces' dominance over the city. With each Sabbath, the cult reinforced its connection to the beyond and prepared the city for an ascent of dark power. With this new information, Madison understood that the city was approaching a crucial event, a major Sabbath about to occur, likely the climax of the rituals. The dates mentioned in the records coincided with a series of inexplicable events and supernatural manifestations she had witnessed. Determined to prevent what was coming, Madison searched for the next location marked on the map, a historic chapel located on the city's outskirts, shrouded in an aura of mystery and desolation. The chapel, with its Gothic architecture and decaying appearance, seemed to be a central location for the Children of Darkness's plans. Inside the chapel, Madison found a series of symbols and inscriptions confirming her discoveries. The main altar was covered with candles and ritualistic objects, and a series of notes left by cult members detailed the preparations for the major Sabbath. The chapel was set up to be the epicenter of a monumental ritual, intended to open a portal to malevolent forces and ensure total control over Melbourne. Madison realized that time was running out. The city was about to face a catastrophic event, and the only chance to prevent chaos was to disrupt the ritual before it was too late. Armed with the knowledge she had gained and determined to protect the city, Madison prepared to confront the culmination of the Sabbath conspiracy and face the dark forces threatening Melbourne. The city was gearing up for a decisive moment, and Madison was at the center of this battle. With the courage and determination she had acquired throughout her journey, she prepared to face the final challenge and prevent the dark forces from taking over Melbourne. The sky over Melbourne was heavy with clouds, and the city seemed to be in a state of tense anticipation. Madison had uncovered all the necessary elements to understand the magnitude of what was about to happen. The Great Sabbath, the climactic ritual of the Children of Darkness, was about to begin, and the city was preparing for the final confrontation between light and darkness. Armed with the knowledge gained from the documents and the map, Madison arrived at the ancient chapel at dusk. The place, now shrouded in an aura of desolation, seemed to be in complete preparation for the ritual. Candles and ritualistic symbols were in their places, and the main altar was covered with a series of macabre and ancient objects. She entered the chapel cautiously, trying to make no noise. The atmosphere was charged with a sinister and disturbing energy. The air was thick, almost palpable, and smelled of burnt wax and charred herbs. The feeling that something terrible was about to happen was overwhelming. As Madison hid in the shadows, she observed the cult members preparing for the ritual. They were dressed in ceremonial robes and making final preparations, chanting in an ancient language that seemed to echo through the chapel walls. The words were charged with a disturbing power, and Madison felt waves of fear and despair. The ceremony began with rising tension. The cult leaders, including a hooded figure who appeared to be the head of the Children of Darkness, positioned themselves around the altar. They performed a series of complex rituals, moving in a precise and sinister choreography. The ritual circle was illuminated by candles and marked with symbols glowing with a supernatural light. Madison hid behind a side altar, watching what was happening. As the ceremony progressed, the city outside the chapel seemed to begin reflecting the internal chaos. Loud noises and a series of supernatural manifestations started occurring, as if the opening of a portal was affecting Melbourne's very reality. At the ritual's climax, the cult leader raised an ancient artifact, a mysterious object that seemed to pulse with dark energy. He began chanting in a rising and frenzied tone, and the energy around the chapel seemed to intensify. The ground began to vibrate, and a black shadow started to form in the center of the altar, expanding to create a rift in reality. The portal was about to open fully, and the city was on the brink of total collapse. Madison knew she had to act quickly to prevent the ritual from being completed. With her heart racing and adrenaline pumping, she approached the altar, trying to move undetected. While the cult members were engrossed in the ritual, Madison made her way to the central artifact. With a burst of courage, she managed to grab the mysterious object and threw it against one of the chapel walls. The impact caused an explosion of energy that destabilized the ritual and began to close the rift on the altar. The cult members panicked as they saw the ritual collapsing. They tried to regroup and regain control, but chaos was spreading. The chapel was overtaken by a series of supernatural disturbances, with shadows and malevolent entities being repelled and the portal beginning to close. The dark energy that had been building up was dissipating, and balance was starting to be restored. Madison faced the cult leader in a final confrontation. He was furious and desperate, trying to complete the ritual at any cost. The battle was intense, with Madison fighting against the dark forces and the cult leader determined to destroy the city. Finally, Madison managed to disarm the cult leader and interrupt the final preparations of the ritual. With the ritual thwarted, the chaos began to subside. The supernatural manifestations lessened, and the chapel, though damaged, was starting to regain its tranquility. The cult leader was arrested, and the remaining members were either dispersed or captured. The city of Melbourne was relieved, but the battle had left its marks. The final confrontation was just the beginning of recovery and restoration. Madison knew that the fight against dark forces was not completely over, but she had managed to prevent the imminent catastrophe and protect the city from a grim fate. As the night gave way to dawn, Madison felt a sense of exhaustion and triumph. The city was safe, and the threat had been temporarily contained. But Madison's journey was far from over. She knew the world was full of mysteries and challenges, and her struggle to protect the balance between the spiritual and physical realms would continue. The sun was rising, casting a gentle light over Melbourne, but the city was far from calm. The battle that had unfolded in the chapel had left deep scars, both on the landscape and in the hearts of its people. Exhausted and marked by the experience, Madison knew that the end of the ritual was not the end of her journey, but a new beginning. As the city began to recover, the morning mist seemed to hide secrets that Madison still needed to uncover. The threat of the children of darkness had been contained, but the feeling that something greater and more sinister was behind it all persisted. Madison was determined to uncover the full truth behind the events and the connection to the cult. She began her investigation by analyzing the documents and artifacts she had collected. There was a pattern in the information, and the records mentioned a guardian of the portal, an entity that apparently was behind the maneuvers of the children of darkness. Madison needed to understand who or what this guardian was and what role it played in the scheme. The lost map, besides showing the ritual locations, also indicated a specific place marked with an enigmatic symbol. This place was an ancient hidden library, known only to a small elite of esoteric scholars. Madison was able to locate it through ancient references and found the entrance hidden behind a historical mural in one of Melbourne's public libraries. The hidden library was filled with old books and manuscripts, many of which had been neglected and forgotten. The air was saturated with the smell of aged paper and old ink. Madison began to examine the documents, looking for any mention of the guardian of the portal and its connection to the cult. After hours of research, Madison found an ancient tome that seemed to be the key to understanding the guardian. The book was written in an archaic language and contained descriptions of an ancient and powerful being capable of influencing and controlling supernatural events. The guardian was described as a being of great power, operating in the shadows and manipulating events for its own sinister purposes. The reading revealed that the guardian had existed beyond known dimensions, a being that had been banished to limbo through ancient and complex rituals. The children of darkness had attempted to reverse this banishment, believing they could control the guardian and use its power to dominate the world. Madison realized that the final ritual in the chapel had been an attempt to open a portal for the Guardian to return. The struggle she had faced was only part of a larger plan involving the restoration of a being of immense power. As she continued reading, Madison found a passage about the need to perform a sealing ritual to ensure that the Guardian could not return. The ritual required the collection of ancient artifacts and the performance of a specific ceremony at a sacred site. The book indicated that the sacred site was an ancient temple dedicated to a protective deity, located outside Melbourne, in an area of great spiritual significance. Determined to complete what she had started and ensure that the Guardian remained banished, Madison traveled to the indicated temple. The temple was situated on an isolated mountain, surrounded by stunning scenery and an aura of serenity. The place was immersed in a sense of calm, but Madison knew that the ritual had to be performed with precision. She followed the instructions in the book, gathering the necessary artifacts and preparing the site for the ceremony. The atmosphere was charged with a powerful and reverent energy, and Madison felt a deep respect for the importance of what she was about to do. As the sun set, Madison began the sealing ritual. The ancient words were chanted with precision, and the artifacts were placed in their proper positions. The energy around the temple started to vibrate, and the sense that something profound and fundamental was being accomplished was palpable. When the ritual was complete, Madison felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The Guardian had been definitively sealed, and the threat that had loomed over Melbourne had been neutralized. The city was now safe, and balance had been restored. As Madison prepared to return to Melbourne, a sense of peace enveloped her. She knew that her struggle had been difficult, but the city was in a better place now. The journey had transformed her, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The starry sky and the tranquility of the mountain gave Madison a clear view of her mission and what she had achieved. The story of Melbourne, marked by shadows and light, now had a new page, and Madison was ready to face new challenges with the courage and wisdom she had gained on her journey.